Good morning, everybody. Let's start with a word of prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, thank you for this day that you have made, that we can rejoice and be glad in it. We give you thanks for your word, that you lead us to study it and love your word, and we pray that you would give us great wisdom, even as you blessed Solomon with that great wisdom, and in addition to earthly wisdom, and even more so, give us that heavenly wisdom that begins with the fear of the Lord. As we study your word today, increase our faith in us, and give us joy in our callings to where you place us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I guess that one went home today.
All right. I'm so happy. I talked to Julissa just briefly yesterday, and so I had sent a little package a week ago, and she asked for a knee brace, and rolled up in that little, like a compression, sort of just to support it. I rolled up a couple little mini Snickers in there. She got them. She was so happy. I was like, yeah. She's like, I got them. I'm like, okay, good. So.
Is she doing okay? Is she still like?
It seems like she's kind of gotten over the hump of, her body is caught up with the physical conditioning that they're demanding and some of those things, and they're passing their various qualifications and things. So next Thursday we get the official stamp that says, yes, she graduates on the 2nd. But at this point, it would really only be an injury or something that would cause her to have to recycle at this point. So she's doing very well, and so we're so proud.
Of December or January?
December.
It's close then.
It is close. It is very close. So that affects our schedule. So no class next week for Thanksgiving. The day before Thanksgiving, we'll have church that night. The week after that I'm going to be flying down to Oklahoma. So we'll have this week, yes, but then 2 weeks off.
Does she know where she's going after that?
Oh, you know what? I just realized something. That first Wednesday, that's the first Wednesday in Advent. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to figure out what to do with that. That's that one caught me by surprise. Because Thursday is the family day and Friday is graduation, so I'm flying down Wednesday, but that's the first Wednesday in Advent where we have an Advent service. So, boy, I'm glad we talked these things out. This is good. Sometimes I just don't see these things coming. You just miss the forest for the trees. We'll figure it out.
Is she allowed to have packages?
She can receive packages, no food. Yeah, don't send food.
Well, that's kind of
I mean, that got lucky. That was lucky. These two little mini things got sneaked through. Don't, because if you send her food, they'll take it, they'll eat it in front of her, and they'll make her do extra push-ups, and yeah.
Well, that's awful mean.
They are.
I'm just saying.
It's boot camp. I mean, it is the whole. I mean, that was early on. She was like, the DSs are mean, and they make us do things, and they just find reasons to make us do stuff over, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, it's called boot camp. I mean, that's pretty much what it is.
Make them eat.
Well, I thought of that, too. I thought of, well, I thought of sending those, the nasty jelly beans, but like putting them in a regular package, so they would go to eat them and be like the vomit flavor and, that kind of stuff. Well, yeah. Yeah, the sugar-free gummy bears are stuff that cause diarrhea, and is it like a laxative? Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah.
Or something gets her in trouble.
Yeah, that'll be the problem though. Nevertheless, so. All right, 1 Kings. We did a couple chapters last week, and we're at chapter 3 of 1 Kings, And Solomon has been made king. He's certainly old enough to be married and have a child and these things. So as far as looking at how old he is, I mean, we're not talking pre-adolescent or anything like that. He's probably 20-something or so. We'll get to that in a minute. But so chapter 3, he's established his kingdom. He's eliminated some of his rivals, and he took care of the couple people that his dad told him to take care of after he died, and he's taking care of those things now, and so now his kingdom is being established. So the first thing he does, Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. God didn't tell him to do that. You know, God didn't say he needed to do that, or that, you know, to make a marriage alliance is to try to make peace or to defend yourself against possible enemies and things. And you know, God had always told him, you know, believe in me, follow my statutes, and I'll take care of you. You won't need any alliances with other countries and things like that. But nevertheless, he decides to make a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, which also suggests that that Egypt is still strong, is powerful, and that it's a country that he wants to be allied with, so that they have their own significance there. But this is really the first we've heard about Egypt since, I mean, the Exodus, really, in a lot of ways. Yeah, they really became a non-player to the Israelites after that. When you consider that they had wiped out their pharaoh and most of their army and things in the Red Sea, I think Egypt probably went through a period of decline after that, militarily, because they couldn't defend themselves and things. But
When did Solomon get to be wise?
coming up.
The very first thing he did was dumb.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. You know, what's interesting about all this is that even David's reign and all that, it's almost like the Exodus starts going backwards. You know, now they're allied with Egypt, and where they had been out of slavery, and it's just, it's just they're working backwards now. So he took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places, however, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord. So there are kind of two statements there. One, she was staying with him in the city of David, and while he was building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem, that's his long-term building plan. But at the present time, the people were sacrificing at the high places because no house yet had been built for the name of the Lord. So at this point, the tabernacle is at Gibeon, I believe, and then the Ark of the Covenant is at another place. And David had asked, to build the temple, but God had said no. And in the meantime, people had set up these sort of high places. Either geographically, they were literally high plateaus or high points. And what's interesting is even among the pagans, even today and things, when you want to get closer to divinity, you go up. Whether it's Mount Olympus, Mount Fuji, or all these different places, you go up to seek the divine. Even the Tower of Babel, when they wanted to reach the heavens and make a name for themselves and make themselves like God, they built a tower to go up.
Well, they put St. Paul on the hill.
St. Paul on the hill here, yeah. Only if you come from the east, though. If you come from the west, we're just at eye level, or the south. So they had these high places, high not necessarily also geographically, but just exalted places. There were these places designated to set aside as worship points. This becomes an issue. These could have been places that they adopted over from the Canaanites who were already been worshiping there, and so then they started worshiping there, and so that's why they were sort of the high designated places or whatever they may be. What's sort of stated here, though, is that they were offering these sacrifices at these high places, including Solomon will in a short time. But they are worshiping Yahweh in their making offerings at these high places. The suggestion is that if a house had been yet built for the name of the Lord, which they actually did have with the tabernacle still, that they would be offering their sacrifices there or something, or worshiping there or something like that. But they did have the tabernacle, so that should have been where they were doing these things. So we begin seeing the blending together of the pagan worship practices of the Canaanites being adopted into the Israelites until the temple is established, and there's sort of that wearing away of that fidelity that is happening there. This ultimately becomes a problem in the divided kingdom after Solomon dies, when we really get the established distinction between the northern tribes and the southern tribes. The southern tribes, Judah, Benjamin, they have Jerusalem where the temple is, and in the north, in Israel, they wouldn't cross over into Judah to worship at the temple, so they set up their own high places to worship there as well. And that's even the Samaritans are, eventually that'll be a problem with the Samaritans when Jesus visits the woman at the well, and she says, should we worship here on our mountain, or should we worship in Jerusalem? And that's that division between north and south, kind of making that distinction. So the concept of the high places is pretty significant going forward. The key part being, worship where God has told you, worship how God has given you to worship, instead of seeking him where it's convenient, where you want to find him. Seek him where he has said you may find me. This is really works against the concept of those who say, I can worship God out on the deer stand or on the golf course or in the fishing boat. And it's like, I wouldn't go setting up your own high places quite like that. I mean, there's devotional life that that you have in your, but that's not instead of your regular gathering around God's word and sacrament. There's a big distinction between those, and I would say use this as a lesson to say, setting up my own high places and worshiping as I decide to see fit doesn't work so good in Scripture. I mean, even at the foot of Mount Sinai, when they built the golden calf, I mean, Aaron said, behold the gods behold the God who brought you out of Egypt. It was a golden calf, but it was like worship Yahweh by worshiping this thing. But God was like, that's not how you do that. That's not how we do this. And you may call it whatever you want, but it is not worshiping the true God unless you're worshiping as he has given us to worship. So the people are sacrificing the high places. Verse 3. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. So even in the writing of 1 Kings, they're identifying that he did well, but there's the but he was offering sacrifices at the high places, showing that that's not what was intended. That was not a good thing. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Gibeon's that high place. That's not where the tabernacle was. So he went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. And Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. I mean, that was like his home church, we'll call it that. That's where he really liked to go and sacrifice for whatever reason. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give you." What a great question. But at the same time, has God made that offer to you?
No.
Not in a dream. But didn't Jesus say, whatever you ask in my name, I'll give it to you? Yeah. So we have access in prayer to God, the same that Solomon did to God in that dream. God is still going to bestow on us according to his will. But his desire is that, ask your heart's desire. Ask what you want. And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you." That's a pretty generous retelling of David's life. But, is that maybe what forgiveness is all about? The whole David and Bathsheba thing and all these other problems that David caused and all his sin. In forgiveness, God really does cast it as far as the east is from the west, so that the memory or the legacy of David is that he walked before God in faithfulness and righteousness and uprightness of heart, and God showed steadfast love. "You have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day." Though we are unfaithful, God remains faithful. God had made that promise. "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or to come in." So he says a little child there, and it is sort of it is words to say like he's a little kid. And obviously he's sort of downplaying it, because he's not a child, but perhaps in his feeling of taking this responsibility on, being in over his head, he does sort of feel like maybe it's like although I'm just a punk kid, what do I know? Here I am being made king, even though it's almost like when you begin to move back into maturity, when you're a little kid, you sort of, you're a little kid, and just the responsibilities aren't yours. And then when you become an adolescent, or that early adulthood, you think you're all grown up, and you don't really have a grasp of, you don't know what you don't know. You think you know everything, and you don't realize what that there is to even know that you don't know yet. And then when you come back out of that, when you come back into wisdom and maturity, you begin to look back and say, I didn't know anything. And maybe I don't know anything right now. That almost seems like maybe that's what Solomon is talking about here. It's like, I thought, here I am king, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like a little child.
Was he still a teenager, maybe?
No, I think he's in his early 20s here. He's old enough, he's married, he has children.
20,
Yeah.
but he's lacking in experience and assuming the kind of responsibilities that he now has. And I look to it as a mother giving birth to her first child at the age of 22 and thinking, I've got this big responsibility. Am I capable of doing this? And you have to ask the Lord.
Good, me too.
Well, yeah, that was another thing. I had 2 kids.
Mom with 2 kids, right? Yeah. So it's I don't know if it's been I don't know if it's a Sunday school sort of illustration misconception, or if it was the felt boards that maybe gave us the thought of that we've got I think sometimes we confuse Solomon's dream for wisdom, and maybe we sort of interlace it with Samuel's call to be, who was a kid. Samuel, when he was called to be a prophet, was young, and he went to Eli, and he was a kid. He was a young child. He was younger than 12. And I think maybe that's what we're picturing when we see Samuel having this interaction here. Maybe we're sort of interpolating those two things, but I think it's more in terms of he at least realizes what he doesn't know. And that's really a great sign of maturity. Look up what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's when you start learning something, you get to this point where you think you know so much, but you really don't know anything, but you act like you really do, and then you come through it and you realize on the other side of it, wow, I didn't know anything. Yeah. Verse 8, and your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude, though my dad tried to. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? I mean, what a wise and faithful thing to already ask for. To say, look, I've got this huge responsibility. The true wisdom would only come from you. Help me to be a good king. Help me to be a great king, because these are your great people, and this is a huge responsibility for me. And verse 10, it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. That's a great offer. And God said to him, because you asked for this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Asking for long life or the life of your enemies or riches and these things, that's what a kid would ask for, right? Or that's what an immature king would ask for. It's the whole genie paradox kind of stuff. It's like it's kind of what this feels like, but it's not. But it was the first thing you wish for. More wishes, right? Or See, the trick is you got to ask for more genies. All right. So So God's impressed by this, and he says, look, because you didn't ask for those things, and you asked for this very wise thing, behold, I'll give what you ask. I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. So I'll make you the wisest there has ever been. And as we see Solomon's life play out, we see that there is a big difference between wisdom and faith, or wisdom and faithfulness. There's the earthly wisdom and discerning of right and wrong in earthly sense in his kingship, but he makes some terrible blunders with respect to his faith and these things. So we want to make sure as we think about these things, that as we go through our life and as we learn things and as our faith grows, that there's a big difference between wisdom and faith and faithfulness. So I'll give you the wisdom that you asked. In verse 13, I give you also for what you have not asked. So you didn't ask for the things I expected an earthly, selfish person to ask for, and you asked for a good thing. I'm going to give you those things anyway. Riches and honor, so that no king shall compare with you all your days. So hey, there you go. So you're going to get all those things as well. And if you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. So there is God still, saying, I will be your God, you be my people. Remain in me and I in you. But if you rebel from me and you turn away from my path, then those things are going to dry up, because I want you to, I would be, as a father, to discipline you and to bring you back to me. I want you to remember that I'm the one that you depend on, not all these things. Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And then he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up burnt offerings and peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. And so at this point, the Ark of the Covenant is at Jerusalem. And there so instead of being at his first act of wisdom was to not offer up another sacrifice at Gibeon, at the high place, but instead to come and stand before the Lord in the Ark of the Covenant. Because that was where God had located himself. That was the mercy seat. That was, that was the Holy of Holies embodied right there where the Ark of the Covenant, in fact, was. And the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, the peace offerings were the ones that people could bring, and in particular, those were the ones that portions were given back to the people to eat. And so the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, making a feast for all the servants, probably the peace offering meat is what they had in the feast. So they're sort of extending that blessing to his servants and to his household as well. So his first act of wisdom is to go back and worship before the Lord's location, not just anywhere where they wanted to. Verse 16, we begin to see some of Solomon's great wisdom. You probably know this story, but how many of you knew that it was two prostitutes that came to argue about the child?
It's the first I heard.
Yeah, normally you think it's just two moms, living in the same house or something like that. No. This is
No, I've never.
different than that.
Prostitution legal?
Oh, no. I don't think so. No. There's something for that, too, I guess. But then two prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth, and we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. Only we two were in the house." You got that down? It's just the two of them in the house. Like they said it like 3 times. "And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him." How sad. I mean, that's genuinely sad. "And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while your servant slept, and laid him at her breast, and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, behold, he was not the child that I had born." So it's, switching babies and stuff like that. You hear stories and whatever, but so that's what she had tried to do. But the second mom figured it out. Like, this is not my child. But the first said, "No, the dead child is yours, and the living child is mine." And thus they spoke before the king. So they had not been able to resolve this in the lower courts, and so they had brought it all the way up to the king now at this point. And they were arguing about, whose son is the living one and whose son had died in the night. And then the king said, one says, "This is my son that is alive, and your son is dead." And the other one says, "No, yours is dead, and mine's the living one. Here's the deal. Bring me a sword." We get nervous at this point. How are the women? Considering reputations of kings and just the whole concept there, and by the way, we are prostitutes, and so what's going to happen with that and whatever, and here we are bickering before the king. That probably doesn't play very well either. So they bring a sword. So a sword is brought before the king. And the king said, "Divide the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other." That seems like a strange thing. But, so it's like, all right, kill the child and divide them up, and then they'll have what they have. Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, "Oh, my lord, give her the child. By no means put him to death." But the other said, "He shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide him."
So then he knew who's the real mother.
Then the king answered and said, "Give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is the mother." And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. So basically the summary there is the mother who was willing to divide the child knew that her child was already dead. And if my child is dead, then your child's going to be dead too. She would rather have no child than just the one dead child. And the mom whose child was living was like, no, I don't, I would rather the child live in somebody else's care than have him die. So no, just let her have him. At least he'll be alive then. And there it is. Pretty wise.
It was a sacrifice of a mom, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be willing to let the child live even in the care of someone else.
Who doesn't have the greatest morals. They're
Well,
like,
yeah, they're, yeah.
Just count 'em.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Not showing the greatest mom qualities in the one.
There's two chicks in the house
Yes, Christine?
In verse 28, the word off.
Yeah.
Does that translate to what we
What was the question?
The question is, they stood in awe of the king because they perceived the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. No, I just think they were just impressed. Yeah. They're like, wow, wow, wow.
Maybe they really thought he was gonna, actually kill the baby.
No.
So when he didn't, they were like,
They were just
such
impressed.
wisdom. They were so, yeah.
Yeah. I think, even as we look at it, and they say, wow, that was pretty smart. Yeah. Yep.
A 20-year-old who hasn't had children yet? Who knows? That was.
It's possible. Have we already had him having kids yet? Mm. Trying to decide whether Solomon has already had kids or not. I'd have to look more closely as far as the timeline. I think he would have had kids by then.
Well, then I can understand that.
Yeah.
But not having kids, you don't have that connection, so you don't have that fatherly feeling.
Right. If you got a little time to goof around, hunt down. It's probably the clips are probably on YouTube or something like that. The Simpsons have a really good. They do fractured Bible stories sometimes. Where they sort of retell the Bible stories with the Simpsons characters, and they have one where Homer is Solomon, and they bring in a pie, and they're trying to decide whose pie it is. And he says, "Bring me a sword," and he cuts the pie in two, and he says, and he eats the sword. And he says, "Put them to death." No, he eats the pie. It's kind of funny.
I had a note back when Solomon had his dream that he did have a son.
Let's see
at the
that.
time.
Yeah, I'd have to look more closely, and there might be a parallel in Chronicles as far as when his children were born and things, but we'd have to take a look. All right. So, chapter 4, we get, so this is just his administration, his high officials. Azariah, son of Zadok, is the priest, and he's got the secretaries, and he's got Jehoshaphat, was the recorder, and Benaiah, commander of the army. We heard about him. He was the enforcer that killed the guys. Zadok and Abiathar were priests, which is a little bit interesting because Abiathar had been banished, remember? But, sort of priest in exile, or just, he was a priest, but with no authority. Azariah, the son of Nathan, was over the officers. Zabud and Asher, in charge of the palace, and the one who was in charge of the forced labor, so the captured.
Forced labor sounds like slave labor.
It is. It's the slave labor. Yep. And Solomon had 12 officers over Israel who provided food for the king and his household, each man making provision for 1 month in the year, and probably also from the different tribes, bringing in those administrations and things. You got Ben Everybody, as the. So Ben just means son. So son of Hur, son of Deker, son of Shemesh, you know. These are all the people.
Depends. There's a line up there, 12, I guess, or 11.
Huh?
Says Solomon's daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, Ben-Abinadab in all Nephdor. He had Taphith, the daughter of Solomon, as his wife. So, wow, maybe even a.
How old was she? At least 12.
Yeah.
No, this thing
14.
says that Solomon's first wife, Naamah, an Ammonite, gave birth to Rehoboam a year before he became king. Solomon became king. Of course, that's
Okay.
internet.
Yeah, I'll have to look at the reference to that. So yeah, he's already had Rehoboam before he became king even. Yeah, that makes sense. So.
Solomon two daughters. Yeah,
But yeah.
700 wives.
All right, so we've got all the folks there who are administering all these things. And verse 20. Judah and Israel were as many as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. And so, even there in verse 20, you have, again, that distinction between Judah and Israel. You know, that's hinting ahead of what's going to be happening with the division between the northern and southern kingdoms in other times ahead. But you know, there were as many as the sand by the sea, and they were eating, drinking, and being happy, and there was peace, and there was prosperity, and God was blessing their kingdom. And what does that phrase that, you know, there were as many as the sand by the seashore remind you of?
Abraham's offspring.
Yeah.
Abraham's promise, right? God made Abraham a promise. First to look up and see the stars. That's so shall your offspring be. And there'll be also, as you know, there's the heavenly analogy, but then also an earthly analogy of your offspring will be as many as the sand is on the seashore. So there is the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham.
Who can count that?
That's right. That's exactly right. Who could count it? Only God.
So many people. I mean, all the people that died in the wars, and they still have people.
Oh yeah.
I'm amazed.
Hey, be fruitful and multiply. You know, it's exponential population growth when when people when you're just having babies and the babies just keep coming.
How many people died in World War II? Look how many people growing up.
Yeah. Between World War I and World War II, I mean, tremendous numbers, and then the killing fields, in Russia, the millions there killed, and their communist things, and I mean, yeah, China, yeah. So Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 30 cores of meal. I think those are it's like 60 some bushels or something like that.
It says 64 or something.
Yeah, that's a lot. 10 oxen and 20 pasture-fed cattle and 100 sheep, deer, gazelles, roebucks, fat and fowl. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Tippash to Gaza, over all the west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all sides around him. Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan even to Beersheba, so from north to south, from sea to shining sea, basically. Every man under his vine and under his fig tree all the days of Solomon. That's a reference to... No, I don't like the fact that as I'm looking at these things, I'm trying to focus. Shush. I don't want to hear glasses. I just got. Yeah. When I started taking Hebrew at seminary, and this was already, I mean, that was 2001. I wore some cheaters while I was doing that because some of the vowel points and stuff were so tiny I couldn't see them sometimes. But in Isaiah there's a messianic promise about God will bring them back into their kingdom and they'll have their own vine and fig tree and things like that. There's a messianic promise about that. But the whole idea there is, everybody has prosperity and personal prosperity. You have time and energy to set up your own garden and your own courtyard. And this idea of being under the fig tree is used as a reference to studying the Torah, like studying God's word. It's like if you're under the fig tree, you're being enlightened. You're studying Scripture, and your faith is being strengthened. There's sort of reference to that as in the Old Testament. It's why when Philip and Nathaniel meet Jesus, Philip comes in to get Nathaniel, and he comes back and he says, and Jesus says, "I saw you while you were yet under the fig tree." There's sort of that, oh, behold an Israelite in whom there is no guile, and I knew you while you were still under the fig tree. So while you were, there you were studying scriptures and that kind of idea. So it's kind of maybe a reference here too. Is there was also the knowledge of the Lord was increasing, that kind of idea. Solomon also had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots. Anybody got a different number? King James have a different number there, Christine? 40,000, or is it 400,000 there?
Mine has 4,000.
4,000? Yeah, there's.
Sorry, I was reading something else.
But mine's NIV.
Yeah, there's a decimal place sort of in dispute there, whether it's 4,000 or 40,000 stalls. But either way, that's a lot of stalls. 40. And those officers supplied provisions for King Solomon and whoever came, each one in his month. And they let nothing be lacking, and barley and straw for the horses, and swift steeds they brought to the place where it was required, each according to his duty. So, just prosperity beyond belief. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, the breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. So not only were the people like the sand on the seashore, but his wisdom expanded as far. So that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan and Heman and Calcol and Darda, the sons of Maol. Now, some of those names show up in the book of Psalms, actually, as writers of Psalms. And we have at least one psalm that Solomon wrote, and obviously the Psalms of David as well. Verse 32, he spoke 3,000 proverbs, which we have the book of Proverbs. There's not 3,000 in there per se, but and his songs were 1,005. 3,000 seems like just a round number. Like he had like a million proverbs and 364,010. It's just very kind of funny specific there. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. So he studied nature. And the people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. So, his wisdom and blessing was not just within the people of Israel, but Solomon's wisdom was a blessing to the whole world. You know, Solomon's wisdom was a blessing to the corners of the world. All the kings were coming to him. You know, all the nations gathering to him for wisdom and things. There's sort of this son of David thing going on there too, where Christ says, you know, I will gather all nations to myself and things like that. And you know, the true wisdom of God being the fear of the Lord. You know, that Christ really embodying that. This is all very Genesis-like, you know, that Solomon was wise over the beasts of the field and the birds and the reptiles and the fish and things like that. You know, God had said, have dominion, have rule over all these things, and here he is now. Here Solomon is studying these things and being learned in all these things. It kind of reminds me of like Thomas Jefferson was sort of this lively mind where he studied everything, and you know, he was like scientifically wise and all. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of how and obviously Solomon surpassed that even. But,
How long does this go on? Like, how many years is it like peaceful and everything's plentiful, and do we know like about how long?
yeah, within his lifetime, it's pretty much the Pax Solomon. You know, he builds the temple in peace, and so here we go. Chapter 11 is when we begin to see that he loved many foreign gods, and the adversaries rise up against him. So 20 or 30 years ish.
A nice peace and everybody just being able to live. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great that, you know, when God blesses his people, the blessings overflow around there too. You know, that Solomon is also generous. All those things that were brought in, that was his provision for his servants and his household and his officials and all like that too. Which, in a way, though, how does the king gather all those things? How does the king lay claim to all those things? It's taxes. I mean, they bring all these things from the different tribes and stuff like that because that's their tribute to the king. These are basically taxes. Which God had said, when you have a king over you, he's going to take your vines, he's going to take your cattle, he's going to take your children, he's going to do all these things. These things are going to happen. Fortunately, it was at a time, you know, they're talking about a time here when he could supply all those things and there was still plenty for everyone. But essentially, these are his receiving tribute.
Government surplus.
There you go.
But in exchange for that, they did have peace. They could live
Right.
a peaceful life, which is so rare.
Yeah. It didn't seem like it was a burdensome. It wasn't a burdensome sort of thing where he would, you know, it wasn't the lavishness of the king and the destitute people. You know, that wasn't what was happening, and as God was blessing this, it was all were being blessed by it. All right, chapter 5. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king over the place of his father. For Hiram always loved David. Remember, Hiram was the one who offered the cedars and the workmen and things to build David's house after he became king. So Hiram from Lebanon loved David, and so now his son is king in his place. So Hiram wants to sort of keep up good relations, and so he sent, and so Solomon sent word to Hiram, you know that David my father could not build a house for the name of the Lord because of the warfare which his enemies surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. Is that why God said that he couldn't build his house? No, God said he couldn't build his house because he was a scoundrel. Because he had slept with Bathsheba and the disgrace that he had brought on with all that. It wasn't so much about the warring stuff. Yeah. But nevertheless, but now the Lord has given rest to me on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune, so I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God as the Lord said to David my father, your son, whom I shall set on your throne in your place, shall build my house. Now therefore, command that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me, and my servants will join your servants, and I will pay you for your servants such wages as you set, for you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians. So Lebanon being the area of Tyre and Sidon, Sidonians, and we hear Tyre and Sidon mentioned in the New Testament. Those were the Gentile regions. And the whole concept of the cedars of Lebanon still is a very significant, still is a significant thing. They still have a reputation. And do you know what's at the center of the flag of Lebanon? Big old cedar tree.
I think there's a synagogue in this area, Cleveland area. It's called Cedars of Lebanon Synagogue.
Cedars of Lebanon.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds about right. And it seems like the Sidonians were quite the lumberjacks. They knew how to cut cedar like nobody else. And so Solomon wants to buy the labor and the timber to build the temple. And he says, I'll pay whatever wages you ask. I'll take care of it. And I'm not stealing these. I'm not going to owe anybody for them. I'm going to pay you for them. I'll even send you enough servants because I'm planning on ordering more timber than you could possibly believe. And so I'll send up people there even. And you guys know how to cut it, and so we're gonna do this.
I never thought that the temple was made of wood.
Oh yeah. Well, Solomon's temple.
Well, yeah, I always thought that they were stone.
Well, there's stone.
It's stone foundation.
Yeah, there's stone as well, but then Herod's temple is primarily the one of stone that we hear, see the great stones, and that it was just last Sunday's reading. But yeah, cedar and stone is what maybe we're thinking in terms of like the Greek temples and stuff like that, how those pillars of stone and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's sometimes what we picture. But yeah, there were cedar pillars, and they were wrapped in gold and bronze and just all kinds of stuff there. So as soon as Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, "Blessed be the Lord this day, who has given David a wise son to be over this great people." And Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, "I've heard the message that you have sent to me. I'm ready to do all you desire in the matter of cypress and cedar. They'll bring it down to the sea from Lebanon, and I'll make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you direct." That's a smart way to move it. We'll bring it out to the Mediterranean, float it down, bring it back in, because that's easier than hauling it over the mountains. And I will have them broken up there, and you shall receive it, and you shall meet my wishes by providing food for my household. So he doesn't ask for, he's not even asking for payment or even the wages for his servants. He says, tell you what, just provide food for my royal household, and we'll call that good. Because he's wanting to be generous back to the house of David, of Solomon, now as well. So Hiram supplied Solomon with all the timber of cedar and cypress that he desired, while Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household and 20,000 cores of beaten oil. That is a lot of oil, considering it was all made by hand as well. Let's see here.
This Bible says about 150,000 gallons.
Yeah. The note here says the figures seem to be exaggerated, but they calculate this is the amount that could have been harvested from about 12 acres of property. Let me look at something here. Page 113. there's a reference for that being harvested from 12 acres, and it said kitchen, page 113, and I thought on page 113 they had a description of a kitchen. No, it's the author's last name is Kitchen of the commentary that suggests it's from the 12 acres, and it's on page 113 of the commentary by the dude named Kitchen.
Either way, it's
I haven't done academia in a long time, apparently. Solomon gave this to Hiram every year, and the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him. It's funny that that keeps coming up too, you know. And there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. That's great. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. So they would be in Lebanon 1 month and 2 months at home. And Adoniram was in charge of the draft. So, again, this is that fulfillment of the promise that well, we say fulfillment of the promise. The God of the warning that said, you remember what kings are going to take your people. And so now, not just for war, but now he's drafting them into labor for the house of the Lord. And it's a draft. It doesn't sound like this is a voluntary sort of thing. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country. So there's plenty of stone to be cut as well. Just hard laborers. Yeah, I mean, you can't necessarily have that much cattle, so you are oxen on carts. So, all right, carry it. Besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who they carried on the work. So the first thing he does is he makes an alliance with Egypt. And what's the last? What does he finally arrive at here? What's he doing?
Enslaving the people to build
The
it.
Israelites are enslaved again. It seems like to the king. He's being more Pharaoh-like than king-like.
Verse 13 says forced.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this is not voluntary. You're being voluntold.
He gives them time off, so he says, they
Oh
work,
yeah,
they work a month, go home 2 months, work a month, home 2 months.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite as
Well,
bad as-
Yeah, it's like that.
I mean, you're still compelled to do it.
Yeah.
By threat of disobeying the king, which would probably be death. And yeah, it's nice. Have 1 month on and 2 months off. I get it, but it's still forced labor.
Yeah.
And this is still not freedom.
Seems like a lot of people to build that temple.
Remember, this is all by hand. I mean, this is barely Iron Age stuff. I mean, they're using bronze tools, some iron.
Still,
It's a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work.
not that it's good, but I guess it's better than making people, like if they were drafted or enslaved to go to war. I mean, because the chances of coming home are probably slim. You know what I mean? Not that, I'm not saying that's good. I'm just
So-
saying, like, the alternative could be he was forcing them into a war.
So what it doesn't seem like is that the forced labor is imposed upon them abusively. That it's like you are compelled to come and work, but you are also then cared for. Versus like when you were in Egypt, they were the taskmasters and the slave masters, and there was the whippings and the beatings and bricks without straw and this kind of stuff. It seems like there was at least provision for this, but at the same time, you didn't have a choice. Which, when God talks about slavery and masters and these things within Scripture, it's never permitted to mistreat those who are in your service, even if they're slaves. You don't have the right to treat them as property or abuse them, or work them to death, per se. So there is a certain ethic with which they have to administer this, but obviously still questionable because it's like, who wants forced labor? You know, but that's what kings do. That's what earthly powers do. When they want something, they force it they take it by force. Because, I mean, yeah, they're drafted into this, but that's always done, and taxes are always collected at the tip of the spear. Because if you say no, there's penalties, and ultimately, the ultimate penalty would be death. So it's all still kind of behind that forced labor concept there, but yeah. So yeah, you've got what 180,000 people at work of this, and 3,300 of them overseeing it. That's a lot of people. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebal did the cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. So, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. And then they lay out the things of here. Let's show it here. There we go. So here we have the we've got the huge pillars here. These pillars were described as being cast in bronze. Imagine the earthworks that they would have to create even to set these things. So, here's 60 feet. That's about 60 feet, so, 120 some feet in each direction. So you have the main set up here. You have the Ark of the Covenant, and then he had not only the angels that were on here, but he had seraphim on either side, and the decorations and adornments on the walls, and the lampstands, and just for scale, and the altar of incense.
Is that the pillars that Samson took down?
No. Those were the center pillars of the house where they were having the big party and among the Philistines.
It's really amazing when you think that this was all done by hand, by everyday people.
Yeah.
It's amazing,
So, go ahead.
What is in the,
These?
Yes, they look like dining room tables.
Those are lampstands. Yeah. Yep. So this would have been utilized the same as the Ark of same as the tabernacle. So you've got the holy place and the most holy place. This was the area people could work around these areas, the storehouses and the treasure rooms and things like that. But as far as the holy place, the priests would go in there and offer the showbread and the burning of incense and those sorts of things. And then the most holy place still was the time for the Day of Atonement. So that was still being administered the same as that. Outside of this area, down out here, there's the little dude, just as far as scale goes. That's the guy, big area. Outside of here, then, would have been the altar for burnt offerings and things like that. That would have been still part of the larger courtyard area.
why is it so big?
It's the house of the Lord.
Okay. I just thought that was too, simple.
So people really didn't go in.
No, the priest would do this. Would work here. Yeah, the priests were the ones who did here. They would have the doors. I think they would keep them open so that there was you could sort of see and stuff like that. But as far as actually it wasn't like that's where the Joe Israelite would come in and do their thing there.
So who would do the cleaning in the most Most holy place.
Yeah, that's something that's always intrigued me as well, because it's like, you know, things you can't touch or things you can't go into except once a year and things, and yet at the same time, it was all cared for. Or even when, you know, it's like, oh, you can't go into the Holy of Holies except for the once a year, except for every time that you took the thing apart and carried it away. You know, so while there is the liturgical movement of, you know, to not go in formally, you know, as part of that, except that one time, I'm sure there was some coming and going as far as maintenance and caring and cleaning and these sorts of things that were permissible. You know, it's like, well, you know, nobody could go into the king's chamber, well, except the people that were supposed to go in there. You know, that kind of idea. And I think that, you know, that's what plays in here as well.
It's on top. It looks like there's chambers up there too.
Yeah, so the storehouses, and, you know, they're sort of showing that there were different levels, you know, for storing the various treasures and, you know, the gold and silver that were donated, and the temple treasury and all that kind of stuff. And there was lots of other buildings and things like that. And then even when you look at like Herod's temple later on, you know, there's the temple fixture, but then there's the court of the Gentiles and the court of the women, and there's all these other sort of layers and areas that were built up around it as well, with the center focal point being the holy place and the most holy place. Like you go to a cathedral, you got the main area, and then there's lots of stuff around it as well. You know, and it just kind of goes by scale. I mean, when you had the tabernacle, it was of a smaller scale of things, and you know, that's what it was. But now when you go on to a much grander scale, well, then there's a lot more to it. Even just the administration of it, the maintenance of it, and things.
And could you please remind me one more time, what is the city specifically called?
This is Jerusalem.
The district.
Yeah, this is being built in Jerusalem.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
I was confused with the whole like Lebanon thing.
So this is going to be built at the millstone, the threshing floor where David went to and offered the sacrifice for the pestilence, and the Mount Moriah where Abraham offered Isaac and was saved. I mean, that's the Temple Mount. That's where this is being built. And then this one will be destroyed, and then they'll build another one under Nehemiah and those guys. The second temple is built there, and then Herod will expand on that temple in Jesus' time. So this one will get destroyed, and then they'll rebuild the second temple, and then Herod will expand on that, and that's the one where Jesus interacts.
That's the one in 70 A.D.?
No.
It gets destroyed?
No, this one gets destroyed. Well, at the beginning of the exile, as part of the exile, when the Babylonians come in, they're gonna destroy this, and then they'll rebuild it later on under. Yes, when they let them come back and rebuild things at the end of the exile.
So another temple will wind up being built over the same spot where this one was?
Correct.
And how many temples were built on that same spot? Just the
Two temples and one mosque.
And the mosque is there today.
Yes.
You can see why this is such a controverted place, is that when you look at Jerusalem, when you see pictures of Jerusalem and you see the Dome of the Rock, there's sort of this golden dome. That's the mosque called the Dome of the Rock that is built on this location by the Muslims. After 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. Then Islam comes around a couple hundred years later. Islam's false theology traces some parallels with, they claim Abraham as part of the Islamic history and things, but that it wasn't Isaac that was offered there, but Ishmael. And so the Ishmaelites is where the Muslims trace their lineage back. I mean, it's not true. I mean, it's not a true theology. And so they've, you know, when they conquer that and they built the Dome of the Rock and they built this mosque there and things, and then in the 40s when the state of Israel is established then and the wars and all this kind of stuff, the Temple Mount is retained by the Palestinian Authority, and the Jews are still forbidden from entering in there. There is one section of the foundation of Herod's temple that is accessible from outside the Palestinian Authority area on the western side of the Temple Mount, and that's called the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. Those are foundation stones from Herod's temple that's why that's so significant, because that's the only remnant of a temple that the Jews have any sort of contact or access to. And so that's why that site is so significant to them, because that's their only even remote connection to their temple, because the Palestinians are never going to give up the Temple Mount, certainly not willingly. And that's why that area is so so conflicted. There's so much conflict there. Because I mean, the Palestinians say, you know, we were here, and then the British were administering that area, and then after World War II, they said, well, you know, we'll let the Jews all move back there. And the Palestinians were all like, but we're already here. And they were like, too bad. And they just took their land, and that's why the Palestinians refer to the state of Israel as occupied territory, because they understand it as a foreign invader came and occupied the land that they already possessed. And then the Israelites say, well, the modern day nation of Israel says, well, obviously we were there before you were, and it's like, well, don't talk to any Canaanites, because then they're really going to have a problem with you, because, you know, there's a certain point when you got to say, well, who was there first, and it's basically got to come down to how can you live collaboratively, not at war with each other, and that's why it's a big mess.
Pastor,
Mm-hmm.
in that illustration, where would the curtain for the temple be on?
Oh, good. So you got those lampstands there, and you got the guy in the center holding his arms up before an altar, and then this is the temple curtain here. So they're sort of showing doors there too, but this is the temple curtain in this area here, and that was huge in height and in thickness, and I mean it was heavy duty. Do you know what it was adorned with? This is going to throw you for a little bit of a loop.
You mean the curtain was adorned with?
Yeah, there was well, certainly at Herod's temple. I don't know if it was already at this time. I think maybe. Constellations. The zodiac. Not because of the pagan assignment to it, but the marking of months as symbolized by, of time, symbolized by those constellations, adorning on that, showing that this is sort of the barrier between heaven and earth. Well, doesn't exist anymore, so that's the thing. You know, that's the big problem. But that was the idea, that as you looked toward the Holy of Holies, you sort of look through the heavens to get to the Holy of Holies where God is. You have to look through the heavens to get to, you know, through space. You have to look through the heavens to get to heaven. Kind of interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
It was split in two.
Yeah, ripped in two from, it says from top to bottom. I don't know.
Wasn't it about 4 feet thick?
Yeah, it was really thick too. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you think of the power of that.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you've ever been, Well, there is that. If you've ever been to a theater, like a proper theater, like a huge theater that has a big curtain, I mean, those things are thick.
Yeah, to think of it being just,
Yeah.
well,
But they're not several feet, though.
Not several feet. Well, maybe. No. I mean, there's several layers. There's layers. And this is layered.
Oh, that's later.
This is layered. There's not, you don't, it's not a woven piece of fabric that's 4 feet thick. No. This is layers of material. Yeah, this is layers of material.
with God, it's possible.
So this 480th year after the people of Israel came out of Egypt is significant for the dating of the Exodus. I mean, this is part of the, because we have, so from this sort of creates a focal point from which later on we have records of things related to Solomon's reign. And this becomes that focal point that says, well, so 480 years before that was when the Exodus was. So that's the way that we can establish a date for the Exodus in relation to our calendar. Hold on a second. That this is about 967 BC, so 960 years before Christ, and so based on that, so based on 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1, the Exodus took place 1446 BC, 1446 BC, 480 years before Solomon built the temple. And so when you subtract the reigns of Solomon, David, and Saul, the conquest and the wilderness wanderings, about 300 years for the judges, about 400 years of rest in the judges, and things like that. So we sort of get that calculation of various things from, this becomes an important focal point date to establish both directions. All right, so the house that the King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. So I think 18 inches for a cubit. So 90 feet by 30 by 45. Yep. The vestibule in front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits long, equal in width of the house, and 10 cubits deep. It just kind of goes on and on about describing how it all was. Verse 7. Sorry, I was reading in my study Bible instead of on here. Verse 7, when the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the house while it was being built. So they cut everything off site, brought it in, and stacked it there. The burden bearers carrying it, yeah. So it's kind of that idea of, that as this has become sacred space, it was a hushed. There was a hush over the crowd even as it was being built. No hammer or iron tools working there at the site. Right. So the entrance for the lowest story was on the south side, and one went up by stairs to the middle and the third floor. And he built the house and finished it. He made the ceiling of the house of beams and planks of cedar. He built the structure against the whole house, 5 cubits high, and was joined to the house with timbers of cedar. So, there's the outer structure, and then the roof, and how to support the roof, and all those things. Verse 12, Concerning this house, the Lord came to Solomon, concerning this house that you are building. If you walk in my statutes and obey my rules and keep all my commandments and walk in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to David your father, and I will dwell among the children of Israel and will not forsake my people Israel. We'll get to the dedication of this temple shortly, but during the dedication, the glory of the Lord rushes into the temple, and then later on, as the people are going into exile and idolatry and these sorts of things, there is a vision of the glory of the Lord leaving the temple, which becomes the fulfillment of this. If you walk in my ways and statutes and you follow all these things, I will dwell among the children of Israel. My glory will be in the temple. But if you forsake these things, how long-suffering he was with them and these things as the centuries went on. But eventually he came to the point where he departed. And that's when it all really, the nation collapses. So Solomon built the house and finished it. He lined the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar, from the floor of the house to the walls of the ceiling. That must have smelled really good.
Or overwhelming.
Or overwhelming, yeah, that's a good point too. Keep the bugs away, yeah. He covered them on the inside with wood. He covered the floor of the house with boards of cypress. He built 20 cubits of the rear of the house with boards of cedar from the floor to the walls and within the inner sanctuary as the most holy place. The house, that is, the nave in front of the inner sanctuary, was 40 cubits long, and all was cedar. So verse 18, the cedar within the house was carved in the form of gourds and open flowers. All was cedar, no stone was seen. So it was all, intricately carved and adorned cedar through the whole thing. That the stones were there, but no stone was seen because of all the cedar. The inner sanctuary he prepared in the innermost part of the house to set the ark of the covenant of the Lord. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits, and he overlaid it with pure gold. So you got 30 feet on each side covered in gold. He drew chains of gold across in front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. He overlaid the whole house with gold until all the house was finished. And the whole altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold. I mean, granted, you can pound gold very, very thin, and they could do it that very thin as well. But still, I mean, that's a lot of gold. That's a lot of gold. At the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. 5 cubits was the length of one wing of the cherub. It was 10 cubits from the tip to the tip of the other. Verse 27, he put the cherubim in the innermost part of the house, and the wings of the cherubim were spread out so that a wing of one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other touched the other wall. And the other wings touched each other in the middle of the house, and he overlaid them with gold.
So they had a gold mine somewhere nearby, huh?
Well, okay, so this is the whole thing about the Solomon's mines and the gold of Solomon and these sort of legends and
But there were so many gold idols in Moses' time.
Yep.
When those were brought.
Yep.
Or melted
Yep.
down.
Yep. Gold that was brought and used for the tabernacle, and then that is now being reused, and all those things being gathered. And so just before we wrap up today, because we'll keep talking about the temple and things, the temple is the image of heaven. The temple is the embodiment of God's heavenly throne room and its relation to earth. So hence the curtain and these things and the holy place and the most holy place. the book of Hebrews talks about, these things were the shadow of the heavenly things. This is God providing an earthly vision of a heavenly reality where he would dwell. And so then when you get like Isaiah's vision of the heavenly throne room, where there are two cherubim on either side of him flying, well, you have in the heavenly throne room where the Ark of the Covenant is, these two cherubim figured there. I mean, Isaiah's 100 years, almost 500 years later from this. But this is the heavenly vision, the earthly vision of the heavenly reality is here. And the closer you, like we would talk about when they were building the tabernacle, the closer you got to the Holy of Holies, the more extravagant it became. So the Holy of Holies room is not just covered in cedar and carved, but it's all cedar and everything, but then the cedar is covered with gold because you've reached the innermost, the apex of where God is located himself in his glory, to provide a place for his glory to dwell among his people so that they would have access to it. That they have access to God's glory as he is their people. He is their God and they are his people and he is among them. Pretty
And
cool.
Solomon designed this whole thing?
So it's really just a expansion or a multiplying of the tabernacle structure. I mean, this is still the same structure as the tabernacle, the outer court, altar sacrifice, holy place, most holy place. But now it's being built in in a permanent structure. Well, what they would think would be permanent. It's not permanent, we know. And now that it's going to be located in one place and to reflect the extravagance of the riches of Solomon, the house for the Lord has to be the most extravagant place as well. So as far as who designed it and things, he talks about having all the overseers and the designers and these things like that. That's how it all comes into it. So that's not as though it all comes from his own mind necessarily.
That's what I
But,
was thinking, like,
yeah.
who's making the decisions on gold goes on what?
Well, I imagine Solomon's the one who finally gets the final word on all those things. Yes.
I have a footnote that says, though David was denied the privilege of building the temple, he did make the plans and provisions for its construction.
Oh, that's interesting.
The reference for that.
It tells you to see 1 Chronicles 22:2-5 for that.
1 Chronicles 22.
Yeah.
Chronicles is funny because it gives us some of these intermittent details. David prepares for the temple building. Yep. Provided great quantities of iron for nails or the doors, and yeah. So David provided materials in great quantity before his death. So there you go. All right. We will pick up there in a couple weeks. So no class next week. Thanksgiving, no class the week after that. I'll be gone, and then we'll pick up after that.
Are you going to have it even though we have the services?
Yes, so we'll still have Bible class from 10 to 11:15, and then the morning Advent services will be at 11:30.